and welcome to Hashtag AskBen Part 2. Well, it is finally here. In January of this year, I made the first part to this video where I asked you for your questions for me by utilizing the phrase Hashtag AskBen. So when I went to make it, I used a keyword search for Hashtag AskBen in the comments. Quickly after this, I was alerted to the fact that I missed quite a few questions, due to differing phrases being used, such as a space between ask and ben, or other variations of the such. Well, I kept promising a second video on the ones I missed, but as time marched on, I lost track of it all. Over the past few weeks, I've been getting a lot of requests for the second video, so here it is. This time I manually searched through my comment sections due to YouTube basically crashing when I asked it to look up comments using ask or ben in all comments of all my videos. So at this moment, if I missed your question again, then I truly am sorry, and you may need to repost it when I say I'm making another video like this. So being we have 13 questions to go through, my lucky number 13, let's get into it. M&M Rat Pack wants to know what cryptid scares me the most and which would I not like to discover while I was alone. Ooh, this is a real tough one, to be honest with you. While I respect all animals including cryptids and are fascinated by them, that doesn't mean that they aren't still terrifying in their own rights. First off, we're going to rule out any water-based ones since, as many of you know, I won't go near deep bodies of water. Also, we are excluding any of those found purely in mythology, since their existence is more questionable than some cryptids. I would say Wendigo, but that is one of those gray area cryptids. So I'd like to say, after some long consideration, that it would be a toss-up between the Dogman or El Chupacabra. A werewolf-like being that has never been human and is pure animal could be quite dangerous, not to mention that even a scared dog will become a ferocious being. On the other hand, the Chupacabra is more of an ambush predator, in which you may never see the attack coming. Granted, they tend to seem to like the taste of farm animals, but I wouldn't want to test that theory in case they suddenly became curious as to what human blood tastes like. 009 brings up an interesting point, that so many creatures around the world have cannibalistic tendencies. Why is this possibility never discussed when dealing with Bigfoot or any other cryptid? I appreciate your delicately way of putting this question, but it is quite well-known activity that many animals share. Now when it comes to cryptids, I would assume that anything is possible, especially since bodies are very hard if not impossible to come by. Even as such, a certain cryptid might not be traditionally cannibalistic, but maybe members of the group are. I hate to say it, but much like humans, many of us would never think about eating a human, but a very small percentage do or have. Again, I hate to say it like this, but recreationally, or if the situation requires it, such as survival. That doesn't mean that humans can be considered cannibalistic if only 1% of the population are. Granted, many of the animals you mentioned will eat their own kind, but most of this behavior boils down to an easy meal. The point that I'm trying to make is that you might find one Bigfoot that will eat its own, but as a whole, they don't. Traditionally, Bigfoot have been seen to bury their dead, so if this is true, it rules them out as being cannibals. As for the others, I would say that the behavior is quite possible, but as stated in most instances, it also involves a scarcity of food. I think the reason this topic isn't brought up is due to more focus being put on trying to prove their existence than to figure out what they eat. It is a good question though. Lena de Bono is curious about the Battle of Troy, which was at one point thought to be a legend and has been recently discovered to have some truth behind it. Would this lend credence to the Minotaur and the Labyrinth being real also? This is quite an interesting topic, and it is questions like these that I love to see. I have seen where many people believe the Minotaur story came from the sport of jumping over bulls that was frequently seen in Gnosis. However, archaeologists did uncover a cave system near Crete, Rome, that could be considered the labyrinth of myth. It is really hard to prove that the Minotaur actually existed, but pose it to say that we think of it from a cryptological way. In older times, anything that was odd was frequently treated as a freak and hidden away from the public. Normally, records wouldn't include such abnormalities unless something else was involved with it, i.e. a great feat or something to fear. Also, if anything human or animal was to be locked away from contact for its entire life, it would become very aggressive to any outsiders. Obviously, I am only assuming the real Minotaur could be a deformed human. Now, it is possible that this creature was a cryptid that made its home in a cave. I'm not saying that this being existed, but it is fun to think about. Maybe this was one of the first stories of cryptids and nobody knew it. Restion Serpentine asked a fun question. If cryptids actually had social media, which would I follow? I must say I love your line about saying Bigfoot posted an update of threw some rocks at some campers today. I could absolutely see that being one of his posts. Actually, I bet there is someone out there who already has an account that is posing as Bigfoot, or one of the other more well-known cryptids. But to your question, assuming in this instance that the accounts are from the real being, I would like to follow them all, but if I had to narrow it down, it simply would be my big two, Mothman and Jersey Devil. However, I would follow Bigfoot as well, especially if he was posting stuff about scaring campers. Gene Pfeiffer is curious about a recent photo of the Loch Ness monster, which appears to show a giant eel. Also, what are my thoughts on the creature existing? I'm uncertain as to what pictures you are referencing, especially since photos of the alleged beast seem to turn up quite frequently. It is to the point that they have been even lumped into a chart of separate categories as to what is being seen, much like the World War II plane reference. A hump, multiple humps, just a neck and a hump, etc. Due to this, I can't respond to your question about a certain photo. However, I will note that as of yet, there have been only 2 photos that piqued my interest, and one of them is from Raystown, Pennsylvania. The other is the infamous flipper shot. The Loch Ness monster is truly one of the standout cryptids that shaped my interest in the paranormal world, but it is what I like to call a I want to believe being. I really want the monster to be real, but it seems those hopes are scant, especially with how thorough the Loch has been scanned and studied. Granted, there is promising theories that it can traverse underwater cave systems to hang out in other lochs or even the ocean, which is encouraging. Within this, I also give its due, since it does have some of the longest historical sightings than most any other cryptid. As you stated, many people believe the monster is actually an abnormally large eel or oarfish, but that has yet to be proven. With so many other lake monsters out there, it does give me hope that it really does exist. Deb wants to know why all the stories about skinwalkers, wendigos, and the like seem to differ from Native American lore when they are found on the internet. Well, thank you for your question, Deb. The problem that we have here is quite a multifaceted issue, and it doesn't just remain within Native American lore. First, a huge percentage of information found on the internet is wrong. Let's get that out of the way. This is why when looking for stories on the internet, you must look at just about all of them to see if you notice any similarities. If 20 stories say the Bigfoot sighted was brown, but 5 stories say it was blue, you can reasonably deduce that those 5 stories probably aren't factual. You may laugh at this example, but it happens a lot more than you may think. The problem comes in that a lot of retellings come from a storyteller's standpoint, and many of those who write about them will inject their own ideas into the topic to make them more dramatic or interesting. Then these stories get passed on and rehashed over and over again until it is now considered fact. Another thing to consider is that many of these creatures have been transitioned to TV shows, cartoons, card games, creepypastas, and the like. Each one is given their own distinct lore, and then that information is frequently added to the original story. I can't tell you how many times I am looking at Cryptid online and I see references to the cartoon Secret Saturdays. While I appreciate them bringing the idea of cryptids to children, it doesn't make their facts accurate. For example, due to this phenomenon, many people preach the fact that the Yeti is a Bigfoot with white fur that lives in the colder climates, whereas it was originally depicted as just being a bear. How many people know that? I even once got into it about that topic with a supposed Bigfoot expert on a podcast when he stated the Yeti was a Sasquatch. As a spoiler, he eventually quit talking to me. On the flip side of this, the internet isn't entirely to blame, as many Native American cultures themselves change how a story went. Different tribes have different lore. As you mentioned, the Wendigo is a perfect example of this. Some say it is a regular beast, others say it is a spirit creature, some say it is a demon, and in another stance, it is a mental condition. Most all these descriptions come from different tribes, so they can't even agree. All previous information I mentioned then all get compiled into one lump, and it results in a lot of the story being way different from its original source, whichever one of those you choose to follow. Atli or God simply asked about my opinion on Nordic cryptids. On a personal note, I have a deep love and infatuation with the Nordic people, including the Vikings. I have many of their symbols on my body as we speak. When it comes to cryptids though, it does tend to fall into a couple categories. Either they are stories of sightings or outright myths, much like the ones found in other parts of the world. Just so we are clear, I'm not saying that they are fake. However, you do tend to see these creatures being involved with a story as a set piece, where someone has to be heroic to overcome them. On the other hand, there are ones that have no epic story behind them, but are just odd. As the saying always goes, behind every joke is some truth. I can certainly see some of these creatures existing, but they could be described in a way that might be more interesting than they really are. BB7738 wonders what my take is on all the native people sightings with giants from all over the world. This is a pretty easy question to respond to. Again, these stories can be simply telling a tale greater than it is due to the theatrics or as to warn tribespeople of dangers. However, as you mentioned, these stories seem to be a common thread, which, as they say, where there's smoke, there's fire. I do want to state that a lot of people throw the Native American accounts in to act as almost a certificate of authenticity, but that isn't always the case. I utilize it when making a point that something has been seen a long time ago. Anyway, we have the Genoskwa, which were basically giant Bigfoot. Then in the Middle East, there literally is stories of people who are giants, which is a video I've been meaning to make. In another part of the world, there are very old legends of giant hairy humanoids, such as the Guadalcanal. Those last beings were presented in ancient stories, as well as a very famous encounter where one was powerful enough to lift a bulldozer blade. To put it simply, I certainly believe that these people are seeing something, but I think many of them are now extinct, or as in the case of the last one mentioned, they are hiding in deep unexplored regions of an area. Kathy Haynes simply wants to know a question that a lot of people ask me, and that is, where do I report sightings involving cryptids or the like, even if they are unsure what it was? First off, I wanted to mention that Kathy didn't want to share her encounter with me in the comments, and I completely understand that. This did lead me to wonder if you would be okay with me sharing your question. But I hope it is, since this is a very valuable discussion to have, as others like you have encountered something and don't always know where to turn to find help. Not to do this, but my comment section normally is a pretty supporting place for encounter stories. As I mentioned frequently, I have one of the best communities on YouTube. I don't say this lightly or as a way to make everyone feel good, I honestly mean it. Most comment sections have quite a few people who enjoy causing chaos, but here, it seems like a pretty open group. Outside of that, my email is located on my main page and you could contact me there. Other than myself, you could turn to groups that share your same views and reach out to them. Personally, if I have questions about ghosts and spirits, I turn to Haunted Road Media. They are very open and unjudgmental with stories that they get. With UFOs and aliens, there are multiple groups for that, but I hear MUFON is now controlled by the government, so you might not want to turn to them. There is an organization called ASSAP, for those who experience the slider effect, which is controlling electronic devices with their mind or body. There basically is a group for everything out there. In your question, you are uncertain what you actually saw, and the first thing you need to do is rule out what you know it isn't. Then you will be able to find the group that you need. Hayes Camp didn't pose the question in a format relating to #AskBen, but I saw this when looking through my comments and I knew I had to include it, since a lot of people have been wondering about the video series I mentioned of state-by-state cryptids. At one point I thought of the great idea, more than likely one of you suggested it, that I would make a series of videos about cryptids, but each video would go state by state and talk about all the cryptids found there. So one would be about Alabama, and another would be about West Virginia, and so on. At first this idea seemed fantastic, and granted it is. However, I really started to think about it and realized that I couldn't do it. Not because it would be too hard, but rather for a more selfish reason. I realized that if I made one of these videos and uploaded them every once a month, I'd basically be out of material in a little over 4 years. This would mean I wouldn't be able to talk about cryptids from the States from that point on without rehashing information. Granted, I could always revisit cryptids for their own videos, but I like to present new and not well-known stories, and to me, in doing that, it would be like telling you what I got you for your birthday as I handed you the wrapped gift. Benjamin Perky wants to know about a South American cryptid that is supposed to look like a giant sloth. Oh, that sounds like a fun one, especially since I absolutely love sloth. I'm not very familiar with the cryptid you were referencing, but I think you were talking about the Mapiguari from Brazil. The cryptid that originally was described as being like a Bigfoot, then evolved into a giant sloth, and then later added the aspect of having a giant gaping mouth located on its stomach. I appreciate the suggestion of a topic, and I may look into making a video about it in the future, especially since it crosses both lines of mythology and reality. Those type of creatures are the ones I particularly love, since it has a distinct path of changing as the story is spread. Yes, I certainly could see making something about this. Future cryptid spotlight, maybe? That one Deep Sea Guy Films says that he wants to become a marine biologist when he grows up, and is curious what my favorite deep sea fish is, as well as my favorite sea monster. I hope you manage to complete your goals of becoming a marine biologist. You have more bravery than I do, since I am absolutely terrified of the things that live in the ocean, namely sharks. However, to answer your question, actually my favorite deep sea fish was a lot harder to think about than sea monster. While I am terrified of great white sharks, I do have respect for them, but oddly enough, I would say my favorite fish would be a toss-up between an angler or the barrel-eye fish. The last one both encompasses the oddity of its appearance that looks like an alien, but at the same time, it has an almost somber, pitiful look about its eyes. Now sea monsters, that's an easy one, and I know many people may immediately assume it would be Megalodon or the Loch Ness monster. But no, it would have to be, hands down, a kraken. A while back my wife bought me a kraken leather wristband, and while I'm not big into that kind of thing, I do love it and wear it as much as possible. At one point I even considered getting a kraken tattoo. Susan B is wanting to know if I checked out Teespring for providing you with merch. Thank you, Susan, for the suggestion. For quite some time now I have tried to find a site that I could offer items that relate to my channel for you to buy. I do think that I provided a link to my store in a couple videos, and I do believe it was from Teespring, or maybe it was Yeti. My issue has always been this when looking at all these companies. They are too expensive. I can't rightly expect anyone to pay over $25 for a t-shirt. Maybe I'm stuck in prices of when I was a kid, but to me $25 for a t-shirt is a little steep. So long story short, I am still in the search for a good merch store that doesn't expect high-end fashion prices. As I end this video, I wanted to thank everyone for their questions, both on this video and the first one. Without my viewers, my channel wouldn't be anything, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you, including those of you who didn't ask a question. Due to this video being all about you and your comments, I won't be including the 3 comments I loved section, but don't worry, it'll be back next week. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for content similar to this. Well, maybe not like this, but more in line with dealing with the paranormal and odd things in life. Also, I would greatly appreciate it if you could share my videos with someone you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. And as many of you kept asking, later!